everybody something?
Well,
lunch.
All right, are we on or what?
You're on.
Are we on the picture show here?
They'll wait for you to speak in the
Oh, is that what they're doing? Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. This is the first meeting of the House Motor Vehicles Committee. I welcome you all here. Glad to see some smiling faces out there. All right, now let's all have smiling faces out there. That's good. I'm Tom Rice. I chair this committee, and I'm grateful for the members being here today. Why don't we just introduce the members here and say hello to you. Why don't we just start off down at the end down there. That's Courtney. Why don't you just introduce yourself? What number is that?
Should be 13.
Got it. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Courtney. I'm the House intern.
And where are you from, Courtney?
I represent Savannah State University.
That's right. Good. That's great. All right. Next one is Pam.
Hi, I'm Pamela Lewis, and I am the assistant to Chairman Rice.
All right, great. Great one, too. Thank you. All right. Rick?
Yeah, I'm Rick Austin. I represent the 10th District, which is Habersham, and a majority of White County.
All right.
I'm Craig Foster. I'm the committee aide for the Motor Vehicles Committee.
John, you introduce yourself.
John Yates, District 73. I have part of Spalding, Henry, and Fayette County.
Okay. And down, what number is that one down here? 24. Got it. Okay.
I'm Scott Holcomb. I represent District 82, which is in northern DeKalb County.
All right. We have a couple more. The vice chairman has just arrived, and another subcommittee chairman has just arrived. So what we're doing is introducing ourselves here. Mr. Battle, why don't you take over that opportunity?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul Battles from House District 15. That's Cartersville in the southeast portion of Bartow County. I serve as the secretary of this committee, and then I found out subcommittee chair.
Just found that out.
Well,
huh?
thank you. I
Okay.
didn't know that before I got here.
Okay. And last but not absolutely not least is my friend Mr. Powell down there. And Mr. Powell, what number are you on down there?
Number 17.
17. All right. You can tell
Are
people.
we introducing ourselves?
Yeah, oh, you are. That's
My
true.
name's Alan Powell from beautiful Lake Harl, and I am a freshman. Republican this year.
Okay, well that's great. And Mr. Powell predates me in this committee, and that goes back a long way. I've been here 14 years, so he predates me. Well, I'm going to ask Representative Battle if he would open us in a word of prayer this afternoon.
I certainly will. Let's pray together. Father, we bow for a moment to just spend some time saying thank you for all of the things that you have bestowed upon us, even though many times we don't even realize it. We thank you for the opportunity of service, and we ask that we always take it seriously, that our deliberations and our decision are made with your leadership and guidance. Bless this time together, for it is in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay. First order of business is to adopt the rules. For those of you who may have seen rules in other committees, you'll find that these to be a little longer. The reason they're longer is because every 2 years we adopt the committee rule regarding special license plates and the process that's been agreed to for special license plates to be brought before this committee. The history on that is that we used to have special tags that required 1,000, well, it didn't require 1,000, but any number could come before the committee, and then they'd have to go back to Department of Revenue for validation and a number of other procedural things. We've reversed that process, and so it's a lot easier when the bills come here ready to go and meeting the minimum requirements for to get a license and move ahead. So anyway, those are the rules. I'll give you a second to look over them, and at that point in time, I recognize somebody for a motion. Okay, Mr. Powell moves on the bill. Is there a second on the rules? Is there a second? Second. All in favor say aye. 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 And that's done. Okay, thank you so much. We've got 3 bills on the calendar today. I'm going to recognize Representative Holt first to come up and deal with House Bill 127. It's the chair's intention that that this will not be sent to subcommittee. I think this is a bill that's fairly straightforward, and I hope everybody will take a good look at it and understand fully what the representative's intent is. Yeah, I think so.
It's witness mic too.
Two.
On now?
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 127 is intended to correct an accidental oversight in last year's HB 1055. As you may remember, the handling of the so-called designer or vanity tags was changed, all of them in that bill. This bill deals with the tag for the amateur radio community, or otherwise known as ham operators. It was not actually intended to be part of 1055 last year, because this is a very different arrangement. And I'll just explain briefly. 20 years ago when these tags were created, it actually sort of enshrined an agreement between the state and the ham community in statute. And the agreement was simply this, that the state would provide free tags to ham operators, and they in return would be bound by a promise that they would provide their communication services free of charge, especially during times of natural disaster or other emergency. Another facet of the agreement was that the tags would actually make it easier for police and other responders to identify ham operators when they're in a community, especially during an emergency situation, and could access those services. Now, this bill, when I had it drafted, I simply went to Legis Council and said, please draft this to reverse the language back to what it was. So you're seeing what was on the books, put on the books 20 years ago. One other detail I'm sure everybody's interested in is, what will this cost? If we return to the peak number of tags that had been issued under this arrangement in the past, it will cost the state approximately $275,000 each year, which I realize, of course, is not necessarily a negligible sum, but at the same time, I think it would be fair to say that we'd be hard-pressed to create an emergency communications network of equivalent size for that kind of price every year. With that said, I'll be glad to take any questions, and I would appreciate your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Representative Holt. Any questions for Representative Holt? Okay. All right, Mr. Battle.
These ham operators that are available for emergency situations, how are they contacted? I mean, is there a procedure that you go through? There's someone with a list of people in the area, and they in turn communicate information through them. How does that work?
You mean, in other words, like in an emergency situation?
Yes.
How do you find them? Well, of course, to start with, if there's just an officer in the area, they'll see the ham tags. But also, the bill includes a provision that the department, I guess in this case, in revenue, the folks track this, they will issue a list to local sheriffs, et cetera, of those in their community who have these tags.
Okay. Thank you. You've answered the question.
Okay. And Mr. Austin.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my good friend, Representative Holt, wouldn't it be a fair assessment to say that amateur ham radio operators would render their services of communication whether or not we gave them a tag?
Well, I suspect that's quite possible. They're all very public
pretty much what they live
folks.
for, is there not? I mean, it's okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Representative Holt? I have one. It looks like the information you just passed out says that almost 25% of the tags went away as a result of this fee increase, right? Okay. So they really don't feel like they're obligated to participate in the program, I would guess, if that's what this is trying to represent. Just for the committee's information, I would let you know that I've asked the department for information regarding the special tags overall, and the number of special tags that have either increased or decreased as a result of 1055 and the amount of revenue that's been reduced or generated as a result of that. Well, if there are no other questions of Mr. Holt, is there anybody else out there that wants to testify on this? All right, we'll recognize you for a moment. Just tell us your name and who you represent.
Thanks, sir. My name is James Altman, and I'm a ham radio operator. I've been a ham radio operator since I was 16 years old. And when I started when I was 16 years old, one of the first things I did was to sit on the banks of the Minnesota River in the springtime, calling in on a little portable radio in 1968 that I had not washed away in the spring floods every year. I was present in the Weather Bureau's radar room, telling them of tornado touchdowns, sometimes as much as 45 minutes ahead of the state police radio relays. I served as the elected representative of the Georgia ham community to the national organization for 4 years in the early 90s, and basically was the head of the emergency communications organization in Georgia. We're highly organized, and there is a ham radio station in all of the emergency management agency operation centers. There is a ham radio station at the Weather Bureau in Peachtree City. We are the communication system of last resort. And in every major communications disaster, Katrina, Andrew, Hugo, Alberto in South Georgia back in the 90s, the communication system is always the first thing to go. Everybody thought the cell phones had put us out of business. Cell phones are now universally recognized as the first thing to go because everybody picks it up and brings the system to its knees. We are there because we are everywhere. We are in your neighborhoods. We are there to provide the communications. When Hugo went through St. Croix, I was the guy who was talking to the only ham radio operator that had a station working in St. Croix and arranged through Senator Nunn's office for 120,000 meals a day and 40,000 beds. FEMA couldn't help us because we couldn't get a written request from the governor of the Virgin Islands. There were no roads. There was one operating radio station. I've operated out of my house since I was 16 years old. When emergency strikes, as it did in Cobb County some years ago and the police tower was brought down, there was a ham in every police car, substituting for the radio communications. How we get into and out of these areas is our license plate. It's what everybody expects to be there, is that ham radio tag. It's our pass into the area. Now, the gentleman who's with me here is one of the district emergency coordinators in the state of Georgia in the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which is organized for this purpose. We are prohibited by federal law from taking any remuneration for what we do. And there are a lot of guys who live for this and would do it no matter what. But they still need to get into the area. And the ham radio tag has always been the traditional way of doing it. And I was around in 1992 when they wanted to eliminate the tags. And the way that the bill worked out was to not only continue to provide the tags, but to make it free. And that's been the arrangement ever since. We still have to pay the taxes on our cars. So I want to thank you. And if you have any questions for me...
Well, we'll get to that right now. Okay. Committee have any questions of our witness here today? Okay. Do you care to comment, sir, on this?
Yes, please.
Tell us your name again.
May I'm expected down the street a block 5 minutes ago. There's a whole room full of people waiting on me.
You're excused for that.
With your kind permission, may I be excused?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. Thanks for testifying. Thanks for the work you do, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Davis. I've been a licensed amateur radio operator for about 42 years now, and about 30 years of that has been here in Georgia. Would like to comment on the earlier question about how amateur radio operators are activated and come into service. Throughout most of the counties in Georgia, amateur radio, and especially with the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which is involved with additional training and working with local EMA directors, they have established these relationships. For example, I serve as the Amateur Radio Emergency Service Emergency Coordinator for Gwinnett County. Have a very close relationship with our EMA director. He has all my contact information, so when there is emergency, for example, I'll refer back to just a few years ago, the county communication system was impaired with one of the towers that went out of service. His first call was to me and have people on standby so that we could back up emergency 911, police and fire communications. Further, I'd like to say just in the year 2010, we recorded over 41,000 volunteer hours in the amateur radio service. A lot of this was involved in training, drills, tests, public service, and also in emergency communications. The National Weather Service uses the amateur radio community as its eyes on the ground. The meteorologist in charge at Peachtree City often uses this analogy. They can see 20,000 feet in the air with their radar, but they can't see what's happening on the ground. To give you a further example, just this morning, several hundred amateur radio operators participated in the statewide tornado drill from the National Weather Service. That is the community that comes together to provide this service when disaster should strike. And as Mr. Altman said, and as Representative Holt has said, the amateur radio tag is widely recognized that we are an emergency responder and assists in speedy communications being established whenever needed. And I'll take any questions. Mr.
Any
Chairman.
questions? Thank you, sir. I really appreciate all your service. Thank you for what you've done for 42 years. That's a long time to do anything. That's great. Representative Holt, you want to come back up for a second there, and let's just ask you one more question here. The amount that you told us was about $200 and some odd thousand.
Yeah, roughly 275,000. That's just based on, it looks like the peak was approximately 5,000.
Okay. All right. So if the numbers continue to decline in terms of the special tag, if we just kept it the way it is under 1055, that amount would decrease next year, right? It would be my guess.
State again.
In other words, the number of tags have gone down by 25% since we instituted 1055. Is that right? That's what your information said. 22%.
A few years preceding that, it had been growing slowly.
Yeah, level. Yeah, kind of level. My point is this: this has got to be recognized in the 12 budget. I don't know if there's money in the 12 budget that recognizes the effect of 1055. Yeah, I haven't looked at that. Have you looked at that or talked to the appropriations chairman about it?
No, sir, I had not.
Okay, all right. I don't see any other. Mr. Powell, you want to comment on this?
I want to thank Representative Holt for bringing this up. Back a few years ago when we developed this, basically giving free tags so that we could recruit folks to help on these emergencies and all. We had an agreement, certain members of the legislature at that time with them, that we'd do this as long as they made an agreement, not in writing, of course, that they would not use the ham radio system to notify the state that the General Assembly was in session.
Yeah, that can be an emergency.
So, will that informal agreement continue if this is just a little humor to this?
I suspect I can impress that on a few folks.
Break the ice.
Oh, me. Okay, do you have another question, Mr. Powell, or do you have any desire to move the bill at this point in time?
In light that it doesn't, even though it doesn't have a fiscal note, I'd make a motion that we forward this bill with a due pass recommendation.
There's a second, Mr. Battle. Okay, we're going to vote on this. I'm going to just put the proviso on, since I sit on rules, that you're going to talk to the appropriations chairman, make sure that they understand what the significance of this is before we move ahead. I hope if it's in the 12 budget, then I hope it comes out of the 12 budget and is recognized in there. With that provision, then I'll ask for a vote on it by the committee. All in favor of passage of House Bill 127, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, Mr. Holt, you're out of this committee and off and running.
Thank you.
Representative Taylor, the Minority Caucus Chair, is with us today. Vice Chairman. Well, does that entitle you not to wear a jacket in these meetings? Or you know you're on television here, Mr. Taylor. You need a copy of the bill? don't think you need too much of a copy of this bill to explain this bill, Mr. Taylor. I think that you should be in pretty good shape here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is a very simple bill, even though it is 3 pages long. It does one simple thing, and it was brought to me from one of my constituents who lives in the Buckhead area, who served in our Operation Iraqi Freedom. And it simply says that retired veterans of the wars, Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, are eligible to receive the retired veteran license plate. Current code doesn't recognize those 2 wars, and this just amends the code to allow for that.
Any questions of Mr. Taylor? Well, I'd like to do that, Mr. Battle, but I think we ought to recognize our newest member here, Mr. Holcomb, down there. If he wants to make that motion, since he served and is back, I'll recognize Mr. Holcomb for that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a veteran of both Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, I'd like to move passage of this bill.
Is there a second? Second. All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Like sign? All right. Mr. Taylor, you got it, and you're off and running. Okay. All righty. We're gonna Mr. Powell, are you ready to talk about 112?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what's the number down there again?
Would you
17.
prefer me to sit up here or go down?
No, you can sit there. You want to move your microphone over so you can hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the benefit of our newest member of the committee, I'll probably go into a little bit more background detail of this. This committee, sometimes we handle what we call department or administration bills, and this is one of those such bills. This has been brought to us by the Department of Public Safety, Motor Vehicle, the Commercial Carrier Division. The bill that you've got in front of you, and I'll go over it briefly, but I've passed out a handout that they had sent me, and it pretty well says what it is. It is what it is. The Motor Carrier Division is the state arm of compliance with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Division rules and regs. It's not just the state laws, but it's really the federal laws that they enforce. And occasionally we find the need to update to put things into sync, state rule and reg and law into sync with the federal requirements that's brought forth. That's quite simply what this bill does. It does exactly that. If you look on page 1, and for those of y'all who will be carrying these bills someday in the future, I hope, while these bills look long and drawn out, they're pretty simple and to the point if you'll take time to read them. Section 1 basically says that there's a financial responsibility, and those motor carriers that are on the roads, they'll meet that financial responsibility. Section 2 deals with the amber light on logging trucks, the flags in logging trucks, and amber lights. It changes basically the light emitting diode, and it says that it'll be amber in color. Changes basically flags to flags, raises the size of that caution flag that's at the end of the truck on the overhanging cargo from 12 to 18 inches. Section 3 deals with the braking. Basically, it says that it'll be in compliance with the rule and regs. Basically, we want these tractor trailers and commercial vehicles, we want them to have pretty good brakes. Section 4 deals with mirrors, that they will have mirrors on the outside of the vehicles, depending on the cab design. Section 5 is a window tinting set forth by the rules and regs by the Motor Carrier Division. Section 6 deals with the tire tread. The only real change in that is, well, it changes the depth on the commercial vehicles, but it also increases where we used to just say retreaded on bus tires on the front. It also adds regrooved and recapped. Section 7 is just basically the definitions. And quite frankly, that's all this bill does. It's needed by the state. When Federal Motor Carrier Safety Division met with the state, with the Public Safety Department 3 years ago, told them they need to sort of get more in line, get things updated. This bill, I can't remember if Was this bill vetoed? Something, I think that the former governor, that I don't mention his name, vetoed this bill because I think when it went through the Senate or somewhere it got tagged with an amendment. And, you know, it didn't take a whole lot for him to veto anything, especially with my name on it at the time. But it was vetoed at that time, and it's just very evident that we're now at the end of that 3-year cycle, and this needs to pass so that we don't lose any federal highway safety funds. And Mr. Chairman, that's what this bill does.
Well, thank you, Mr. Powell. I really appreciate the editorial license you take with the former governor's modus operandi, but that's noted. Are there any questions for the author of the bill? All right, anybody out there in the audience who'd like to testify on this? Well, Mr. Morgan, welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, let me see.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. My name is Jay Morgan. I represent the Georgia Motor Trucking Association, and we'd just like to say that we've worked with folks with MCCD and Mr. Powell's leadership, and of course your leadership, Mr. Chairman. We salute this bill as good for highways and good for highway safety, and thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions for Mr.? Okay. All right. Thank you. Do I have a motion on the bill?
Do pass.
Motion to pass. Second. Second by Mr. Battle. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. Passes. Thank you, Mr. Powell, for handling that. We appreciate it. Our last opportunity today comes from our good friend, Representative Franklin. So, Mr. Franklin, if you'll come forward, and this is a hearing only. We're not going to be voting on this bill, but I've asked Mr. Franklin to articulate what his intentions are, and I ask him to give Representative Franklin your attention. And thank you for coming today, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here before you. I want to remind us of what someone said back around the time that the states unanimously declared their independence from King George. Someone wrote, a long habit of thinking a thing wrong gives it the superficial appearance of being right. Let me say that one more time. A long habit of thinking a thing wrong gives it the superficial appearance of being right. And I believe that's what we have with our licensing scheme here in Georgia and across the country. Someone has also written recently that a license of any sort, of course, is a government-issued document that transmutes an innate individual right into a state-conferred and state-revocable privilege. And we even heard that term privilege used in the debate on the floor earlier today. What House Bill 7 does is recognizes the right to travel, going all the way back in our legal tradition as far as Magna Carta, if not before, that an individual has the right to move about even on the King's highways. And we would say that would be our translated to our public roads today. And what we have done is translated or transmuted what was recognized as an innate right into a state-conferred privilege by the licensing scheme. Now, since the introduction of this bill in a prior term, people have commented and offered objections that, well, what about, the sky is falling, basically. If we do away with the license, then what happens to everything else? Well, the only thing that happens if we do away with the licensing is we do away with the bureaucracy that issues those licenses. And we can look at the budget that's put on our desk this afternoon or this morning to see exactly what the Department of Driver Services costs the taxpayers of this state. But we certainly would no longer need them if we no longer need a license. Does that mean that someone who doesn't know how to drive can drive? Well, anyone can get behind the road today without a license. What happens to them is anybody's guess. I don't think there are any statistics out there of how many unlicensed drivers are on the road. But I would dare say that a wrong-way driver
on Interstate 285 recently probably had a license in that fatality. I would imagine that if we do away with the requirement for an individual to have a license, we're not changing anything else. Is there a requirement that you be of a certain age to drive on the highways of Georgia? If that's a requirement already, not connected with the license, that requirement would stay. Is there a requirement to operate your motor vehicle in a safe manner? That requirement's still there. All we're saying is that the state is no longer issuing or granting a privilege that you have a right to do already. That's all the bill does.
Thank you, Representative Franklin. Are there questions for Representative Franklin? Questions? No committee members have any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you down there, Ms. Powell.
That's all right.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, I did not intend on questioning the author of the bill, and I understand, Bobby, libertarian philosophy and all such as that, but if we did away with the driver's license system, as you're proposing, and follow me with, I'm trying to collect my thoughts on this, but a government is the body politic that is agreed to by the masses to create a civilized society. Would you agree to that?
Not necessarily.
Not about the expanse.
Right. I know in 1776 our framers unanimously declared acknowledging that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So if that's what you're saying, yes, I would agree with that.
Sort of follow me. I'm trying to maybe establish a chain. Governments are created by the people, and they're created for a purpose, and that's to have a civilized society so that people are protected, that there's some sort of a sense of order in government. Would you, well, let me just finish. I'm not
Go ahead
and
finish.
I
won't editorialize till you finish.
But in that process, we don't ride horses as much. We don't travel from here to California on horses. We actually drive in a motor vehicle. In motor vehicles, there's probably not a more dangerous vehicle than that 3,000-pound metal missile hurling up and down the road. So there's got to be some way of controlling people's behavior. And if you did away with the driving license privileges or the licensing act itself, then how would you control that? What would you do with the DUI statutes? What would you do with the rules of the road that create sometimes or supposedly a more safer environment?
I think I got at least two questions out of that. I'm not.
Sure.
I would respectfully disagree that the purpose of civil government is to control behavior. I think based on what our founders said in 1776, it would be to punish those who infringe on the life, liberty, property of another. And it's not a controlling, because I do not believe that having the mere potential to do harm should be considered a crime in the state of Georgia or in any free society. And you mentioned DUI statutes. Those would still be on the books. It would still be, whether you have a driver's license or not, you're still subject to the DUI statute, the crime of DUI. And whether you've got a driver's license or not would not change that particular statute.
Okay, Mr. Holcomb, I think you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a follow-up to the last point that you made with respect to DUI and other traffic offenses still existing on the books, how would the police officers then identify the individuals that they stopped?
Well, they would identify individuals the same way they did before government-issued papers. And how did they do that? Hate answering a question with a question, but what was the need when how did they know that it was Jesse James that robbed the bank? I don't think he had his state-issued papers, but they knew it was him.
Thank you.
I think we're coming, and if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read a very short email that I received.
Yeah, real quick. That's great.
It will be quick. I know we've got other things to do. It says, I'm writing to you after reading an article on CBSAtlanta.com concerning your recent proposal to do away with driver's licenses. I have to say my first thought was, this guy must be crazy. You're wondering why I'm reading this probably, aren't you? But after taking time to read the article, which was clearly intended to make you look like a radical, I have to say that I like the idea. Our country has been gradually shifting away from the true intent of our Constitution, and it's refreshing to see a politician more intent upon upholding rights than making a career. I'm not a Georgian. I'm actually from Minnesota, but currently attending university in Durham, England, and I have been shocked by the extreme government control I have seen displayed here, with video cameras literally on every street corner, high taxes which are included in store prices so you're never aware of exactly how much you're paying, and other ludicrous taxes including a £145 per year tax for owning a television. The worst part is the English people I meet see nothing wrong with the current system, as that is how things have been done. I hope my fellow Americans never get so uncaring about their lack of personal liberty. Thank you for working to uphold the Constitution. And I think that pretty much does sum things up. As if we start peeling back the blinders that and remove the filters of how we have viewed things as it's always been done this way, and start looking for creative solutions, particularly in our budgetary crisis mode, and start looking for creative solutions that not only save the taxpayers money, but start understanding that we represent the people, and it's our job to ensure that they have freedom. And hopefully, as the bill moves forward through any process, we can work towards that objective. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Representative Franklin. I appreciate you attempting to broaden the minds of the body that we've got here. Obviously, the Title 40 structure in the law is long, involved, complex, and involves, as Representative Powell said, many penalties that involve suspension of licenses and things like that have been woven into this as a part of the public safety issue that we all face. And I understand that people would rather not trade public safety for freedom or freedom for public safety, depending upon who you are. And that's an issue, I think, that continues to be one that we have a difficult time sometimes finding where the line is. And maybe we're a little lazy in looking at all these things from the same perspective that you do. But I thank you for bringing this bill and attempting to broaden our minds.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there other things to be brought before the committee today? If not, we thank you for your time. We're adjourned.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. That's really...